Okay. On to our next review of the story. It's going to be The Passive Power, Initialization, book number 1, written by Sean Barber. It is 379 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the novel description. A mid-30s truck driver, must make hard choices on his quest to get home to his family while the world as we know it comes to an end. 700 miles, no truck, and just his loyal dog to accompany him. Can he survive in this world? A world where the system spawns monsters and mutates plants and animals to absorb and refine essence. Let us find out. There we go. Short and sweet, and that definitely encapsulates the premise of the story. It's a RPG apocalypse story that allows people who are caught in it to choose one of three passive power, rather. Divine, so you get your priest and stuff. Cultivation, and mana. The mana stuff essentially comes down to like regular RPG progression stuff. So you get to choose between, I think, 4 different classes, like your basic, I think, mage, warrior, thief, and something else. I can't remember. The main character chooses cultivation. And so it actually is a progression system based on cultivating, not necessarily just fighting. Like the main character can literally progress. If he just stayed in one place and continued to cultivate accurately and efficiently, he would never really have to fight. He would actually progress on his path of power, building up his body, doing all the cultivation, refining stuff that you see in other stories, like improving bones, hardening them, and changing his blood system, and enhancing his muscles and skin, all the good stuff throughout the entire story. And he would progress without having to fight. But fighting is another way of progressing in the story. And it would be kind of a much boring story if he didn't do any kind of action in combat. But that does exist in here. However, the biggest drawback I think to the story is probably like the first 20-25% of the story. It's a little info dumpy. And what I mean by that is because there are 3 paths of power, because there were 3 separate systems of progression, they each have to be explained either by the narrator or the main character directly through a lot of exposition, which kind of ends up happening, or from talking to other people, which also ends up happening. And so there's a lot of information. Sometimes there are like multiple paragraphs going over to the main character trying to experiment the cultivation. It kind of expands a little too long for my particular enjoyment for pacing, especially compared with the lack of action sometimes in the first quarter of the story. But thankfully, once the main character actually meets some other survivors, some other people surviving in the world, the pacing does improve, I think, because he's done setting all the rules up for the system, essentially. Once he gets other survivors, you actually get to see him how other people have lived and survived in this RPG apocalypse after a week or so, I think, to see how the good people are surviving and how there are many, many bad people have trying to take advantage of the situation. I like the fact that eventually you do get to the bad people because those are your antagonists in the story. And that's, to me at least, much more interesting than just monster fighting occasionally, cultivating for a good long time, and then monster fighting again, which kind of happens, that ends up happening in the beginning of the story. On the game mechanic side of things are okay. There's nothing really particularly new or special. Main author is definitely combining different types of path progressions or power progressions. But there's nothing like super different or new. The author doesn't do anything poorly either. There's lots of notifications, skill description, item description, character sheets, and even towards the mid-end story, a good bit of town building and that aspect of how that develops. The main character, again, chooses cultivation, so he does spend a significant part of the story doing things like clearing meridians, strengthening his bones, skins, blood, muscles, all that normal cultivation stuff. And when he does that, he increases his cultivation level, unlocks various bonuses, and increases his keep. So there's lots of that type of progression system. I mean, it all is still very liturgy in that there are notifications to describe it and give you numbers that are hard-coded. So it still is a valid RPG progression system. Overall, it's a good read, I think. I enjoyed it more once I got past the slower beginning section for myself. Again, it doesn't do anything new, and the cultivation aspect was a little overexplained occasionally. But again, I had a really nice time once you got to meet other characters, once you got to see the main character interacting with the world and see how his cultivation made him powerful compared to what the other people are doing, how the other cultivators, the other magic users, the other divine users, and how their power systems differed and structured and compared to each other and came in conflict. So I thought that once you had those opportunities for conflict, the story progressed much nicer, and that the tension was definitely better for me, at least, and the apocalypse stuff came out a little bit more. So for me, had a good time with it. good middle of the road, good stuff. 7.5 out of 10 for Paths of Power Initialization book number 1 with a score of 7.5 out of 10, which is a good review score.